What is up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Steelers Hangover. I'm Daniel, and this time I'm here to stay. And alongside with me is Shannon White. Shannon, how's it going, my man?
Well, it's going great. A lot better weather than we had last week, especially than you had last week.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy, man. I got knocked out twice. I'm still having issues. I'm actually using an extension cord to a different room because my plugins still don't work. I got to get that looked at. But not a lot of news on the Steelers front. I saw some breaking news a little earlier that the Steelers plan to have a joint practice with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Mhm.
What do you think about the Steelers and Buccaneers for a joint practice before preseason starts?
I've always been a fan um, for various reasons. One, you get tired of seeing the same faces every day, going up against the same your teammates, and uh, there's a little extra adrenaline there when you're going up against uh, an opponent, an actual opponent,
Hmm.
and so I think it's a good thing for a younger roster, which the Steelers I consider now to be developing a younger roster to give them guys, especially the rookies, a lot of times their first taste of that step up
Hmm.
against an opponent that wants to embarrass them.
Hmm.
A lot of guys if they get along really well in camp, they're not necessarily trying to dominate their teammate like they want to with an opponent.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think there's something to, when we were talking about this before the show, and I guess there's no better point than to get into it, is what are the focal points of the preseason? We talked a little bit about quarterback position and, perhaps maybe if Aaron Rodgers is a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers, how much of preseason is he going to see? One of the concerns about preseason is obviously injuries. In a joint practice, you can have your starting quarterback out there without the fear of him getting hit. They're going to
Yes.
protect him. They're not going to allow the quarterbacks to get hit. It's a practice at the end of the day. So I think that it could be huge in the sense of trying to get the Pittsburgh Steelers chemistry down with some of those players like a DK Metcalf, like an Aaron Rodgers, who maybe perhaps aren't going to get a lot of exposure out there or time in
Mm-hmm.
preseason to gel or build. I like this for that reason alone, but this kind of tells me probably not going to see a lot of that starting quarterback and starting wide receiver duo out there a lot, at least in that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the preseason. I think they're going to try to limit the amount of possible hits he could take. What do you think?
Well, I agree totally. It's funny you say that. We was also talking about the new 3 game preseason,
Mm-hmm.
which I've even heard they'd like to add an 18th game to the regular season and take off another preseason game and just have two. I think it's very interesting. I think we might see some teams change how they approach the preseason. And what I mean by that is look at the Cincinnati Bengals for like the last 2 years. They've dug themselves a very huge hole within the division, especially by starting out 1-3 or 0-3, because they don't play their starters at all in the preseason. And it takes them a while to start gelling and meshing in the regular season. They get off the slow starts. And then, you're trying to catch up. And once you start getting a rhythm, and then if you have one of your main guys go down, like Burrows or Higgins last year, I think it was, and then that just destroys your building that chemistry and that cohesion. So, as they keep changing these things and the schedules and the rules, you see some teams adapt quicker than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is a good way to adapt. Is a good way to get some chemistry down with limiting the exposure to injury to your quarterback. I think this is also a move you do anticipating a move like Aaron Rodgers signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yep.
There's nothing out there saying one way or another. I think all indications are still pointing in the same direction. I think Gary Dulac made an appearance on a radio show or something of that nature that if for whatever reason Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers, that Steelers would go out there and get a veteran quarterback to back up Mason Rudolph. And so basically saying that Mason would be the starter at that point. I think if Mason Rudolph is going in as your starter, he's probably starting all 3 preseason games. He's playing quite a bit. I don't think you're withholding him, from being out there like you would in Aaron Rodgers. And so,
Yeah.
to plan this tells me that the signing of Aaron Rodgers is probably forthcoming. What do you think?
I haven't really been commenting on Rodgers. I will once they pull the trigger. He signs whatever. But one of the reasons why I agree with your statement as far as Rudolph would be playing a good bit, as would Howard,
Mhm,
is because if you've got a $40, $50 million quarterback, a franchise guy, you're not going to play much in the preseason. You're going to protect him,
mhm.
especially as your offensive line is developing. If you got a guy making what is Mason making $4 million a year or something,
Yeah.
it's nowhere near. Um, those guys, I think you're going to feel more comfortable playing. And I think Mason would play a good bit, but he's also a veteran at this point. He started at least 2 seasons worth of games pretty much
One.
over his career. I think it's around 20 games if I ain't mistaken. So, he's played
Mhm.
a good bit of starter and a good bit in relief. So, um, it would give you more of an opportunity to get a longer look at whoever is number 2, Howard, or if you bring in somebody.
Yeah, exactly. You're definitely gonna if you're bringing in somebody to back up Mason Rudolph, doesn't that kind of also tell you the confidence they have in a Howard that he's going to be the third guy no matter what?
Well, Howard is it's going to be a little bit of a culture shock, I think, because as much as I like him and would like to see him have an opportunity to at least develop into a backup,
Yeah.
because he showed winning tendencies. I like that. You know how I am about winning tendencies. Guys that don't wilt under pressure and make terrible decisions, and we've seen that through the years. Um, but at Ohio State, every time he stepped on the field, their roster was the most talented team. I can't remember a game they went into that they didn't have the most talented roster, and they didn't win them all, most of them, but still they had incredible, next level NFL talent.
Mhm.
Now he's going to go in, whereas the Steelers, there will be multiple games they don't have the best team on the field. Those are the games that the special quarterbacks, those guys who can, raise the level of play of the guys around them, can still be victorious. For a lot of guys, and I don't know which one Will Howard is yet. If you're just strictly a game manager, those are not the prime positions you want to be in. Because you're going to have a great scheme on offense and defense to overcome your deficiencies. So, um, I think that the plan is they don't want to force Howard to start this year at all, and definitely not before he's ready.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just was thinking that you know, if Rodgers ends up not being the guy, that maybe you consider having Howard as number 2. But to think to at this point where I doubt they've seen enough. They've only seen a handful of practices,
Oh, yeah,
whether
that's it. Yeah.
yeah, whether it's been just a rookie mini camp or what they've done so far in OTAs. It's only been a handful of stuff there. But to me, it just kind of says maybe perhaps they've seen enough to know that whoever they bring as a veteran probably is going to outperform him and to be that number 2 guy if Rodgers don't sign, which is I think at this point is a longer shot than anything else. I think all indications are that he's going to end up signing. Some people are pointing it as early as next week. I think a lot of people are hoping that he gets signed before minicamp. I'm not entirely sure about that, to be honest with you. The reason why I'm not sure he's going to sign before minicamp is because he could have signed already. The OTAs is voluntary, so it's not like he'd be in trouble for missing anything. It's minicamp, and if he was going to not sign because he was going to miss something, it would be something that's mandatory, like minicamp. So I think training camp is probably when he's going to sign. Before then, what are your
Well,
thoughts?
all this leeway and patience being displayed by the Steeler organization, he could have said 2 months ago, "Hey, I'm signing, but I'm not going to be at the OTAs. I'm not going to be this and that." And And I probably won't show up for, mandatory minicamp either, other than make a general appearance, a walkthrough, whatever. And it seems like the Steelers would be fine with it. The part that bothers me, and the reason I question whether he's going to sign or not, is he could have done that and nothing would have been different, except for the fact that they would have knew he had signed and that he was coming, and then they could decide, what are we willing to give up to try to get a wide receiver too? The way it is right now, you don't want to give up much to get a wide receiver too. Bring him in and then sit there with an offense that you're not really going to have a quarterback that's going to be able to get him the ball to make it worthwhile. The cost of getting a wide receiver too upgrade. When in all honesty, if it's Rudolph or Rodgers starting, I don't think either one of them makes this a Super Bowl caliber team. So I want to see him build the roster, strengthen the roster, so that when they do find their next guy, they can plug him right in. But you want to do that as feasibly and financially responsible as you can. And right now, I think it's kind of handcuffing them about how aggressive they need to be.
That's possible. One of the things that I think a lot of people are looking at as a thing that has not been done yet because of the Rodgers signing is the TJ Watt extension. I think some folks are looking at, well, they need to figure out what they need to pay Rodgers to figure out what they need to pay TJ. And I think at a certain point in time that may have been accurate, but I think at this point, if they do know that Rodgers is signing, they probably have the financials already taken care of as far as that goes. So I don't know if that's going to handicap them today as much as it may have been a question mark earlier in the offseason. But that is another point. One other thing before we get more into the actual topic of today's show, George Pickens revealed that he basically forced himself out of Pittsburgh before going with the Cowboys, saying something to the effect that the Steelers were happy keeping him and that he had to force his way out. I think he was responding to somebody on Twitter. He may claim it was AI after the fact, but what do you think of that as far as that being possible? Him forcing a trade. Steelers have been known to not want hostages, want volunteers. If that ends up being the case, wouldn't that say that they had him in the plans for this year and now they're kind of winging it at this point?
Well, I remember the week before the trade, he was talking about that he wanted to be in Pittsburgh and he was ready to go and all this stuff. And he always wanted to play with Rodgers. And so I don't believe it. There's things that happen. I think the Steelers I think he said it because he knew the Steelers were more than willing to trade him up to the draft and during the draft, but nobody would give him anything over a fourth.
Mm-hmm.
So they waited. And then after the draft was over, which is one of the things that made my buddy Big G so aggravated, is once the draft's over, that Dallas was willing to give up a third then because they didn't upgrade at receiver. And so I think a lot of times players try to save face, because they're embarrassed they got traded, and they know that a lot of it's their fault for their own behavior. This would have never happened if he'd have showed maturity, been a team first guy. He would not be in Dallas right now, I guarantee you. He didn't force the trade. His actions last year during the whole season and the year prior, those actions forced the trade. So, it's like anytime there's a breakup, it's the he said, she said, it's always the other person's fault. That's all that is. I could care less what he says anymore. But I don't believe it. I don't think he necessarily wanted to be traded, but he's going to make the best of it. And I think that I don't think he's going to be too happy sharing targets with CeeDee Lamb, but we'll see.
Yeah, and you make an excellent point about the whole breakup stuff. Usually the one that complains the most is the one that got the broken up with.
Exactly.
And so He's on par. Now, transitioning to the focal points of preseason, we talked a little bit about the quarterback position and what the focus should be there. Building the chemistry. That even for Mason Rudolph, this is a new offense for him. He's not a stranger to Pittsburgh or some of the players, but he was not part of Arthur Smith's offense, and so this is a new offense for him. I would expect this to impact some other players as well. Yeah, you spoke a little bit about the offensive line. How much do you expect the offensive line to play during the preseason? Broderick Jones is on the left side now. Fautanu's back. He's missed an entire season. Do you expect to see an extensive amount of these guys out there?
Well, we was talking earlier today about topics and stuff, and we're at a point now that some years you go into the year, like if you have a Big Ben back there, or you have a Josh Allen, you have a Pat Mahomes, whatever, your goal you're talking about is Super Bowl. And if you're not one of those teams, and there's usually only about 4 in each league, then I think you got to be trying to get to that point. And the Steelers are smack dab in rebuilding. And, we looked at it. One of the topics we had talked about was, are they better off now? Are they the same as they were last year? Or are they worse off? And, if you look at it just on the offensive side of the ball, they've just been subpar to mid at pretty much every position for about the last 3 years. And even longer, if you want to throw in offensive coordinator, coaching, schematics, So, but what's been the one consistent? There's been different offensive coordinators, different quarterbacks, different receivers, everything. The offensive line, it has just not been good enough. And you can have a weird situation like when Ben played, the way he played and all the talent they had, and they overcome some offensive shortcomings on the line. But usually that's not the case. Even Mahomes lost Super Bowls because his line wasn't very good. Same with some other top quarterbacks. They can't get over the hump without the line because the line controls everything. And if you got a weakness there, you got a real weakness. That's your foundation. So this preseason, you finally got guys. This will be Jones's first opportunity to really solidify that left tackle position. He's had one start there, and in my opinion, it was his best game of his career as an NFL player. We're going to finally get to see Fautanu without anybody in front of him competing for right tackle. It's his position. Just take it. McCormick has some experience under his belt. He's back. He looks good. He looks thicker. They say he's moving better. I haven't got to see it, but they say he's moving better, laterally and sliding and shifting. And they can really improve across the board. But the offensive line, they say it's like the hand because there's 5 fingers. And it makes the fist. And they have to develop chemistry and cohesiveness. In the past, you say, well, how do you judge the center when the guard next to him is so bad that he's a shift? He's just letting people just run right through. It's hard to grade that center or even that left tackle when your left guard's that bad, or vice versa. If the left guard's trying to help cover for a subpar left tackle. So once they develop chemistry and cohesiveness, I think they're going to be light years better this year, which will only help every aspect of the offense. The only way to do that, Daniel, and you know this, you have to play together. You have to understand each other's tendencies. You understand each other's weaknesses. This guy's let's say he's right side dominant, and his weakness is, so he's going to try to overcompensate. So you're going to have to kind of help him, be able to hide those shortcomings and work together as a tandem. And we've seen guys do that great in the past. The Steelers offensive line, let's think back to Pouncey and DeCastro and Foster and those guys. They just played so well together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could happen with these guys. But, and they got a great anchor at the most important position right there at Frazier. but they got to have the time to grow and gel together. So I want to see him play in the preseason.
Yeah, I think they're going to play a lot. I think they're going to have to. Broderick was on the right side for a very long time. He's talked about having to move over to the left side, and he seems excited about it. Concepts brings up him losing weight, and which should allow him to move a lot better. I think that's also a product of him being excited about being in this position and working hard for it. And John brings up another excellent point, saying new quarterback, running back, wide receiver, left tackle, right tackle will take some time. And I 100% agree with that. And I think one of the biggest issues last season going into the year was the fact that the Steelers were at this time last year, were on a proving point where they were forcing the offensive line to prove themselves versus giving them the positions, which in a way kind of hindered their chemistry building to a certain extent. You had Nick Herbig as a starting center. Fautanu was swapping back and forth with Broderick. And you had Broderick and Dan Moore swapping back and forth. Those type of things. And we knew that, or we thought that the Steelers were going to want to have Broderick on the left side, Fautanu on the right side. And even last year, it was at this point a lot of frustrations as to the mix-up and the fact that this offensive line may not be what we were expecting come week one, and then injuries took a toll and kind of blew it up anyways. But for the most part, last year, I think one of the frustrations, at least for me, was the fact that they wouldn't allow these guys to play in the positions where we were expecting them to play, thus building up that chemistry. And we're seeing that this year. And I think that it's going to be huge for this offensive line this upcoming season.
The amount of stubbornness out of this coaching staff that we've seen with Kevin Dotson, that we've seen with Broderick Jones, that we've seen with at the center position, regardless, Kendrick Green and Mason Cole. Mason Cole's a career journeyman. We was all thrilled to have him because he was way better than anything they'd had. And he was subpar. And I guarantee you last year, had Herbig not got hurt, I'd bet anything that he'd have started the first couple of games. They wouldn't even have started Frazier, even though Frazier's light years better than Herbig will ever dream of being. There's a stubbornness, a disconnect, something about veteran, living in your fear, scared they're going to make a mistake as a rookie. Listen, one thing we're going to have to accept this year, as John mentioned earlier, with all the different players in different positions, you got to have patience. When you're out with your child teaching them to do something, as when they're young, you got to have patience because they're not going to be great at it the first time they do it, and you got to give it time, and and then they'll learn. But if you overreact, get mad, lose your temper, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that hinders growth. If you tell them, don't mess up now, I want you to try, but don't mess up, because if you mess up, I'm gonna get aggravated, and I'm not going to do it anymore. Then they don't have one. They don't want to learn because you're holding them back. See, that's what it is with Tomlin. You make some mistakes, you're out of the game. Oh, you fumbled a couple times in the preseason, so you're going to be on the bench. That's not how you. If you got great talent, you also, to develop it, you need patience, and that's something that I'm fine with a 1-4 start if I see there's development coming. I see guys, the offense is starting to put points up, or they're moving the ball. They're beating themselves with some mistakes, right? I can handle that. What I can't handle is the 1-4 start because they don't have much talent on the field. They have talent, but it's young talent, and they won't give them a chance to develop because they're not perfect. You can be fundamentally sound and not make glaring, huge mistakes, but just not be very good, and you're still bad. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I want to see that patience. Let a guy maybe have an off game and give him a chance to rebound the next game. But there's been some quick triggers and some guys putting in a position, it's a no-win situation. And those guys never, sometimes it takes some courage to let a guy develop. And then in the end, you win too, because you give him a chance to reach his potential.
Yeah, no, you make some excellent points there. For this offense, though, and I understand there's going to be some time to grow. I just think that the Steelers' offense was hindered by a lot of things last year. You had some players that were maybe not in the best scheme fit. You had a running back who didn't run the right type of scheme. He wasn't the right type of running back for the outside zone. You had a wide receiver one who wasn't putting in all the effort, especially if the ball wasn't coming to him. And you had quarterbacks who refused to throw over the middle of the field, which is something that Arthur Smith likes to do. And especially with the tight end position, he likes to incorporate that. And yet we had quarterbacks that didn't fit those molds. So I think that this year, even though there's a lot of newness, I think that the pieces are the right pieces so they can work with them at the very least. It's trying to use, a metric wrench on a standard nut, and it kind of works, it kind of fits, but it's not just right. And I think now that you have the right tools, you might have to figure out how to use them still, but at least they're the right tools for the job. And once you get proficient with it, then the offense is probably going to be very proficient. Does that make sense?
Oh, I agree. I think we've all had coaches. Some coaches, if you give them talent, man, they can scheme and they can, they'll just, make you a better team, a better group of men to get the most out of your talents. But that isn't always your guys that are good to develop or rebuild a roster. It's why a lot of superstar players make terrible coaches because they don't understand what a normal player has to do to be efficient. Not great, just efficient because they were naturally gifted and everything come easy.
Mhm.
So a lot of times the guy who can't is actually better at teaching because just to be good enough to get on the field, he had to do everything perfect. And he had to put in that work in the practice and off the field in the off season. So I don't know if our coaching staff is a good coaching staff to develop or rebuild a roster or develop young talent. That they'll have to show it to us because honestly, Tomlin's never done it. And when he's had opportunities, he had an all-pro talent in Kevin Dotson. And not only did he not develop him, he never played him in his right position. Not at all. 3 games to start his career, and the rest of the time, screw it. Nope. I'm not putting you there because that's where you want to be. That is not how you develop a player or build a roster of talent. So I still question. I hope that we have talent. I feel like we have talent now on the field, but do we have the talent on the sidelines in our positional coaches, how they scheme, their game plans, how they utilize the talent on the field? That's still a question too. Now, the Rooney's decided this offseason, no need for no new coaches. What we're going to do is add talent to the roster. Okay, I'm fine. They have to make that decision. They're there every day in the facilities. They're there in the practice field. They got to make those decisions. But nothing that's happened since 2018 gives me confidence that they know what they're doing in that aspect because the coaching has not been up to par since then.
Yeah, I think you have some points there. I think the players that they've chosen since around that time and stuck with as well have a huge role into it as well. Ben Roethlisberger at the end of his career may have handcuffed the team a little bit by wanting to stay a few years a little bit too long. Those type of things. The drafting of Najee Harris, who I don't want to beat up on him. I mean, he ran 1,000 yards every year. Which is not something that's easy to do.
Did
Some
you
of
hear
these
what
big.
he said about San Diego?
What did he say about San Diego or Los Angeles?
Something to the I said San Diego, the Chargers. He basically something to the likes of the practices. The guys are just wandering around and they don't have the same focus and they don't seem like they're there, at this point in the OTAs and all to he got spoiled by being in Pittsburgh and everything like that. And now that's the exact opposite of what Kenny Pickens said. And that's the exact opposite of what George Pickens has said. But, somewhere in the middle there lies the truth. I do think the Steelers take things more serious and have a plan and more organized OTAs than some teams. And I think he wasn't used to how I don't know what the word is, willy nilly, or how they didn't. It wasn't as intense as it was in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that. One thing you could take from the Hard Knocks series was that the coaching is a lot different in Pittsburgh compared to some of the other places, even within the division, even against some of these teams that have made some lengthy playoff pushes in the Ravens and in the Bengals. And Steelers just seemed a tier above. Well, we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back. If you're watching this live, we'll be back after a few seconds. Don't go anywhere. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Before we get back into the content, I want to remind you guys of our website, SteelCurtainNetwork.com, your one-stop shop for Pittsburgh Steelers news and coverage. Make sure you go and check it out after the show. Go through all the articles, be a part of the conversation by making a profile, which is free, and getting in the comment section, talk with the authors of the articles and things of that nature. And while you're there, you can check out the audio-only platform where you'll find my State of the Steelers podcast that airs out every Saturday at around 11 a.m. It'll be there on the audio podcast platform only. So getting back into the conversation, kind of transitioning a little bit now to the defensive side. The preseason focal point, I think it starts off on the defensive line as well. It starts off in the trenches. I think there's some question marks as far as personnel, who's going to be starting. Obviously, on the line front, you have Cam Hayward. But outside of Cam, I don't think any position is going to be guaranteed to anybody at this point. I think every position, whether it be like Keanu Benton or the middle or the nose tackle, which could be Loudermilk. I mean, if you're not looking at the two rookies, I think that those positions are game. Even with a guy like Keanu Benton, who's been with the defense for a couple of years. What do you think?
Yeah, we was discussing that, and I believe, I thought for sure that Keanu Benton would eventually be the guy running opposite of Hayward when Larry Ogunjobi left. Because his days were numbered because the last couple of years he wasn't living up to what he was getting paid. But as you said, when you draft Harmon, and to me, Harmon looks more NFL ready. Everybody compares him to Cam, and I see it. Everybody sees it, but he's way more ready for the NFL than Hayward was. He's much bigger than Hayward was. When Hayward came in, he had to put on some weight, and I think his playing style fits better with what the Steelers are going to want. And then you got Why You Black. I mean, who's just your classic monster in the middle that's going to tie up blockers, but he can shed and make tackles. Something that a guy like, say, Shade Tree, I don't even like comparing him to McCullers because Yaya Black is way more athletic. He can move. He's stronger. He can shed and tackle and stuff that McCullers couldn't do. That's why McCullers was what, 7th round or something like that. Yaya Black is a stud. I mean, he was like in your top 3 or 4 defensive lineman tackles run defense for PFF last year. The guy's a monster. So I think he's going to contribute. Loudermilk, towards the end of the year, there was a couple of games that he graded out for me higher than any of the defensive linemen. And this is a guy that I've not been a big fan of, as everybody knows. But I had to give credit where credit's due. He held the point. He held his ground. And people had to run around him. They wasn't running through his spot. And so I think Loudermilk will make it. I think he'll be part of the rotation, as you mentioned. But where Benton is, I think eventually you're going to see a front line of Benton, Black, and Harmon. But this year, they're all three going to be part of the rotation for sure.
Now, who's going to be on the starting defensive line, though? I mean, let's just say they come out because, we talked about it a little bit before the show 3-4 base defense, or are they going to come out in nickel? Is there situations where do they line up the most? Now, I think that if they're going to end up going with a nose tackle, Black has to be your guy at nose tackle. I know that Harmon can play the position. He's the size. He can probably, play the position. He's a size. He has the size for it, but I don't think they drafted him for that, especially when they pick up Wyatt Black. So with Harmon there, and if they're going with Cam Hayward on one side and you only have one other defensive tackle there, I want to see Harmon out there. I know we haven't seen anything yet, but can he win that position in preseason? Can he show enough in preseason that come week one that he is that starting defensive tackle next to Cam Hayward? Or, they're at the tackle if they come out in base 3-4 as well.
Yeah, I'm like you. I think that if it's a team that's really good at running the ball, say the Ravens, you're going to see your beef. You're going to see Yaya or Wyatt Black in there in nose tackle. Eventually, I think he's going to be full-time starter. But you also got Daniel. I can say his name if I can see it. It's Galade, the nose tackle that they got from the Patriots. As far as I know, he's still around, and I think he's a guy that can be. He's played some nose, and I think he could be in there, giving them that depth in part of the rotation. I think you're going to see a lot of rotation. And I think there'll be some games that they might not open it a 3-4, like say against the Bengals, or a team of that nature that has a more prolific passing attack. So, but I think these guys are going to get a lot of play, and then their usage will be determined by their performance, as Tomlin likes to say, as the season goes on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think this is going to be an important preseason. The trenches are going to be important. I don't see Cam playing much, and so I think we're going to see a lot of Keanu Benton and Derek Harmon and Wyatt Black and Logan Lee and those guys out there mixing it up. The edge guys, TJ Watt is in a contract situation. Even if he wasn't, I don't foresee him playing a lot in preseason. Jack Sawyer was brought on. Hayward, not Hayward, Herbig is on there. You have some other guys behind him, Jeremiah Moon. Highsmith, he's probably a guy also that might get a little bit of playing time, but I really wouldn't play him a lot. He's dealt with a little bit of those soft tissue issues in the past. I don't know if I want to play him too much in the preseason. What kind of work do you think the outside linebackers are going to get?
Well, depending on the contract situation, whether we'll see TJ at all. Highsmith, maybe a series or two just to knock the rust off. But I think the plan is to go a lot with Herbig and Sawyer. As you said, Moon is currently still out there. And then we got to remember that guys like Harrison, who come over from the Ravens as a free agent, and even Peyton Wilson had experience in college on the outside. And so if, there's a good chance they might keep an additional inside linebacker, which they've been known to do. Somebody can win it by their special teams performance as well. Because, when you got a guy like Harrison, he can play either. And that gives you flexibility is in your depth department. And now that supposedly, which doesn't make sense, but DeMarvin Leal, who's been consistently inconsistent and has never been reliable in performance or health, supposedly come to camp bigger than ever, and now they're going to move him to strictly outside linebacker or edge. It doesn't make sense. You know, think if he's going to play edge, he'd be lighter because he played at like 290 to 300 last year, I thought, before he got hurt. So there's a lot of mixed messages. Until I see him actually out there doing it, I don't expect Leal to make the team.
You know, I haven't seen Leal. I've not seen him. I've heard things. You know, I was listening to some folks some insiders or some of the media that gets to go participate or watch in OTAs, and they were bringing up perhaps somebody was out of shape, coming in large. And then they don't mention who, but then they bring up DeMarvin Leal being bigger. And so I'm just kind of, connecting the dots there, thinking it may be DeMarvin Leal as the guy that came in overweight.
He's actually, it's funny, he's thicker, but it's a lot in the thighs and the caboose. He looks thicker. Gotcha. So not necessarily beneficial weight, not muscle mass.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he can get it together and can and it's good weight. We'll see. TJ Watt, and it was brought up earlier. What are the Steelers going to do with TJ Watt? Trade him, not trade him. He's getting older. Nothing's come up yet. If you were a betting man and you had to put a significant amount of money, does TJ Watt get an extension or does he play out his final year as a Pittsburgh Steeler?
Well, I get in trouble for my comments on TJ Watt all the time. It's like I really like TJ, and I've always just respected his effort. What a great player he's been. But trying to be entirely honest, I didn't like the talk about getting paid $1 more than Myles Garrett, and it's a respect thing, and they can afford to do it. Look how much money they got. Well, you don't sign guys to stroke their ego or based on past. You got to pay them for now and in the future. And I don't think that he's as good a player. I should say good a player, that he's going to be as productive. Because Garrett gets his sacks, which is all everybody talks about with TJ. Because, if he gets a sack or two in a game, everybody's like, he had a great game, even if he didn't have any tackles. But he don't get sacks, and then he don't get any tackles either, or maybe one assisted or two assisted tackles. How much are you paying for that? Mm-hmm. Now, if he's dominating 2 or 3 blockers, which we've seen him do before, then he's freeing up other guys, and you see the value. Well, at the end of last year, he was getting blocked one-on-one a lot. And then in the playoffs, he didn't even crack the stat sheet, guys. And I've watched some of the Steelers greats throughout the years, and I don't ever remember them not cracking the stat sheet. And honestly, his playoff performances have been uninspiring at best, if visible, if not invisible. Even when he was super young in that Jacksonville game that the Steelers lost that shootout, he was basically invisible. Besides getting some offsides penalties and trying to do too much and then run himself right out of every play. We see that still. I just don't think that this team, where they're at in their rebuild and what it's going to take to get relevant again, can even consider paying him what it would take to make him happy. And I think he probably would like to try to win a title. And I don't think it's happening in Pittsburgh. So I think it would make more sense to move on, allow him to go somewhere where he'd have a better chance. And I do not want to see a big contract extension.
See, for me, I would like to see an extension. I don't know how long of an extension I would like to see or how many years guaranteed I would like to see that extension. I still think he has a lot in the tank. I think that a lot of the years where he wasn't productive, there's some context there. the offensive side of the ball really wasn't putting up their side, throughout the majority of the seasons. And fatigue and injury and a bunch of other things played a toll in its role when it came to the defense's collapse in the last few years, including last year. I think that the offense, towards the end, when things got tough, when the schedule got hard, there was some injuries. There was, George Pickens wasn't showing up. He had a hamstring injury. Then he wasn't showing up until 20 minutes of the Chiefs game. And, offensively, they just weren't doing their thing. And, during that one game against the Chiefs, Ben's last playoff game, I thought he had a very, very good game, for the first part of the game. I think they held the Chiefs to 5 possessions without points, which was unheard of at the time. And so, the offense just couldn't do their part. Now, the length of time, I think, is the question mark. The amount of money I'm not necessarily concerned about because, if you look at what TJ Watt got last time, which I think was like $28 million, $29 million a year, something like that, percentage wise, that contract is higher than if he were to get paid $40 million a year by the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. In fact, if you look at the percentage aspect of it, if he was to get the same amount percentage wise, you'd be looking at $42 million a year. And which I wouldn't be opposed to. I think he had a pretty good season last year. And I think if a guy's going to get 16 to 18, 19 sacks a year, that's an impressive year. It's not the 22, the 20 where he was sitting at a couple of years ago, but that's still an impressive year.
How many did he have last year?
I thought he had I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I thought he had.
And how many did he have during the last 7 games?
Yeah, he was definitely not himself.
And they kept saying he was injured, but he didn't show up on the injury report.
Yeah, he had 11.5 last year, 19 the year before, 5.5 the year before that, but that was 2022. He was out majority of that year.
I'm just saying, anybody that knows football, if you watched him those last 7 games, he wasn't as explosive. He went up against a couple of rookies that just controlled him one-on-one. They did not have to double him. Going back to that playoff game against the Chiefs, there was a lot of guys that played really good on defense. They were very aggressive. If you remember, he was coming in, they would give him free release, and they would use his over-aggression against him. And the play everybody remembers is a touchdown. But it wasn't a strip sack by him, and then he picked it up and run it in. It was somebody else. And then he picked it up and run it in, which, there's a lot of guys that can do that. I'm just saying that sometimes legend guys get a reputation, and then anything they do, the announcers start saying, oh, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then if you really look at it, it wasn't a clean one-on-one win even. It was a blown blocking assignment. It was you'll see guys get sacked and they didn't even get touched. I don't put that on how great a player. I think White even had a couple of them last year where it was just a total blown coverage or the quarterback rolled right into him. That's just being honest. And, you're going to get those and you're going to have some great moves and you barely miss. They say you get there right when the guy throws it. So it equals out. But he was not his normal explosive self at the end of last year. And that concerns me when we see the tendency to underperform or to be injured the last couple of years. And you got to really think about that before you throw money. I don't care just because you have money in your pocket doesn't mean you got to spend it.
No, I agree with that 100%. But there's one thing that hasn't really swayed, and that's the TJ Watt effect. And I think that what that is the fact that defenses or offenses do have to scheme for him, and it allows for other players to have better games. And I think what's really prevalent or evidence of that is the fact that the record without him is really poor. Without TJ Watt on the field, the Steelers have won 1 or 2 games in his entire career as a Pittsburgh Steeler. And so, maybe perhaps he's not getting those stats like, we would hope he would get, but there is an effect of him being on the field. and that effect results in wins one way or the other. And I, I'd continue to like to win,
Well,
but
I do
I
too. But
get what you're saying too.
I think that the worst thing that any team could do is be that overly reliant on cannot win a game without a player, especially a defensive player. I mean, if it's your star franchise quarterback, that's one thing. But pretty much any other position, the teammates, the remaining roster should be able to rally enough to overcompensate and still be a decent, a solid team. The Steelers have been too over reliant on their stars, offense or defense. When it was the Killer Bees, they were over reliant on them. And here recently, it's been T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, Mika Fitzpatrick. Those guys have to make the big plays, or they don't win. And that's not how it should be. I mean, look at Detroit Lions last year. They lost the guy who I think was going to be Defensive Player of the Year. Easy. He was leading the league in sacks. What's his name? Hendrickson? No.
Henderson. No, wait.
Huh?
Aiden Hutchinson.
Hutchinson. He was leading the league in sacks by a large margin. And they were winning everything. They were undefeated. And he got his leg blown out in a freak accident. And they kept winning. Now, that just goes to show you. Watt goes down, and as you say, they can't win. They can't beat anybody. Or they struggle against even other bad teams. So, they got to get away from that. And maybe the only way to get away from being over reliant on some of these guys is when they're gone.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, that might be what it takes. I just, I just think that for this upcoming year, given what TJ was doing last year, yeah, I get it. Towards the end of the season, he kind of fell off a little bit, but earlier on in that year, he was on point, and he should have had a lot more stats. Than they took away some of the sacks, strip sacks, and some. Kirk Cousins one is one I remember clearly, where they marked him off sides and he wasn't.
Yeah.
And not to mention, if they would actually call the penalties, how much of an effect he would be, because he's held on like 80% of the plays. I think it'd be well worth at least this year. Now, I'm not saying, a 4-year fully guaranteed deal. I think that would be outrageous. But I can see a year or two extension added onto this year.
I just don't see him signing for anything that isn't at least 3 years. I mean, if you could get a reasonable contract like the Steelers did with Hayward, I'm all for it. But it sounds like this is one of them last respect contracts.
Yeah.
And we're going to show, and when they did it with Ben, the guy had won 2 Super Bowls, took you to 3. What is the Steelers won with TJ Watt? Nothing. That's all I'm saying. Some guys can lead you a long way, and some guys, they're great, but you're not winning nothing with them. And in the NFL, the bottom line is winning.
Now, the Steelers have a bunch of draft picks in next year's draft. There's no real point in gathering more, unless you're really trying to get into like the top 10 of next year's draft. Do you just play him out this year at $28 million? I mean, it's a bargain at, TJ Watt at $28 million, in my opinion. But then obviously either franchise tag him next year or let him hit the market and let him go. But you don't get anything in return. Maybe a comp pick the following year. But what do you think there? What is the game plan? Because you do get a comp pick if he ends up leaving after this year, anyways, most likely. What do you think is the best plan for the Steelers?
I don't think a player of TJ Watt's caliber will play for $28 million this year. I think you're going to have problems. Then I think he will want to be traded. So therefore, I think you should trade him. I'm like you. I could offer him, $42 million for 1 year. but he ain't going to take a 1-year deal because, again, that's looked at as being disrespectful. So they're really in a no-win situation. The only way they win is if they give him a 3-year extension and they're lucky enough that he stays relatively healthy and productive enough to make it worthwhile. But the odds are against that. I'd say 50-50 at best. So I do not see him playing his last year in Pittsburgh for $28 million. I don't see it happening.
Well, I mean, he can sit out part of the year, but if he doesn't play, it goes down to like, does the season count? I'm trying to go back to Le'Veon Bell because he was the last person that pulled this or attempted to pull this.
Yeah.
No, but Le'Veon Bell didn't play on his last year's contract. He was franchise tagged. So I think that in this scenario, he would have to either play or he would be forced. Then that year it wouldn't count after a certain amount of time, right?
Like I said, I haven't even thought that far into it, to be honest with you. Because I've been seeing this coming. And I'm hoping that something, the cooler heads will prevail and the legacy and his time in the black and gold is going to matter more and they'll be able to work something out. Because I was concerned about the Hayward situation and Khan and them did a great job. Hayward was reasonable and they was able to work something out. And so I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But yeah, I'm like you. I mean, and at this point, I think a lot of teams know what position the Steelers are in, and they're not going to be wanting to give them a king's ransom for what at this point. That's why I talked about it previously before it started getting near this point. You got to think about that. Optics. How does this situation look? And as teams really willing to give up what this player is, you feel he's worth, his value. And right now, I don't think they'll get it.
Yeah, maybe not, but we'll see. I think that at the least they'll force him to play it. He may hold out, who knows? And then they'll have that option. If he does really, really good, they can extend him. They can franchise tag him. I mean, it could get ugly, but it's not the first time the Steelers have done something like this with a player. I mean, I just spoke about Le'Veon Bell playing out his contract, getting franchise tag, et cetera, et cetera. That's just a couple of ways to play to keep TJ for the next couple of years, if that is what the Steelers intend to do, even if it is kind of forcing him, to a certain extent. Lastly, and before we call it a show, focal point of the defense in the secondary. I don't know how much of Minkah Fitzpatrick we're going to see out there or Deshaun Elliott, given how big of a role they had last year, especially Elliott and Minkah, obviously. What do you expect to see? How much of Minkah and Elliott and also Slay do you really expect to see this preseason?
Well, usually you'll see it in your first half, especially Slay as he gets used to the new system. Minkah and Elliott has to get used to playing with some new guys as well. But your first quarter or first couple of series is where you're going to see them guys, and then you're going to see all these other guys that's trying to earn a spot and battling out for quarterback 3 or 4, whichever your backup outside. Your backup slot between Beanie and Eccles. You're going to see Thornhill. They brought him in for a reason. The Kent, that kid they got, I think it was 7th round maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the guys, and that makes it interesting in the second halves of them games to see these guys trying to make a play, even as a punt returner in Kent's case, to maybe sneak on the roster or at least practice squad. But they're not going to put Elliott or Fitzpatrick out there risk injury very much in the preseason.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And it'll be a good opportunity for Corey Trice and some of the other guys that you mentioned to really get some playing time down, and also some of the newer guys. I'm looking forward to it, man. I can't wait for this to get going. Week 2 of OTAs is going to start this week. Then there's I think a week or so, and then it's mini camp, and then it's a long period of nothing. So be prepared. What do you have before we call it a show? Any final words?
No, it's just been. It kind of reminds me of last off season because we're used to boring off seasons for the Steelers. This is a lot of expectations, a lot of things that could happen. We would like to see happen, but right now nothing's happening. So I think we're all just kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop. So, but I am excited about the season. Maybe not for the same reason everybody else is, because I'm fully committed to rebuilding this thing and getting them back to relevancy and figuring out who's going to be a part of that and who ain't. And that includes coaches. So I'm anxious for it to get here, but I ain't going to wish my summer away either.
Yeah, me either. Now, if the Steelers were like a Super Bowl contender, I might be wishing my summer away, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please like, please subscribe, ring that notification button. If you're not getting notified of the lives, it's because you're not hitting the like button. So hit the like button. With that being said, Shannon, take us out, my man.